So I'm Chris Schorr, Senior Policy Analyst and Acting Director for the Higher Education Reform Initiative at the America First Policy Institute. In the fourth edition of its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the American Psychiatric Association defined gender identity disorder as a persistent and strong cross-gender identification and a persistent unease with one's sex. During this period, counseling for gender-confused children emphasized resolving stressors and issues related to desistance. In 80% or more of such cases, children successfully overcame their confusion and went on to live normal lives. In 2013, the APA released the DSM-5, replacing gender identity disorder with a new diagnosis, gender dysphoria. Along with this change, the APA embraced a standard of social and medical affirmation of gender nonconformity. In the wake of this decision, there's been an explosion in the number of children identifying as transgender and in the number of children accessing sex reassignment surgeries and hormone therapies, also called gender-affirming care. Many of the children who underwent these procedures, having been guided to them by adults, including medical and mental health professionals, are now detransitioning or have detransitioned. Detransition Awareness Day is a day to recognize these individuals and to raise awareness of both their health needs and of the risks that gender transition poses to vulnerable children. We are fortunate to welcome several remarkable guest speakers today, including Dr. Jared Ross from Do No Harm. Dr. Ross is a board-certified physician with over 24 years of experience as a paramedic, firefighter, and educator. Dr. Ross is clinically active in the emergency medicine, EMS, and addictive medicine. He is also an assistant professor of emergency medicine and the founder and president of EMSEC LLC, which provides healthcare consulting and medical education. He is an emergency department assistant director and an EMS medical director for several agencies and education programs. Dr. Ross has presented at over 90 national and international conferences. He is frequently interviewed for media commentary. Dr. Ross advocates for individual rights, bodily autonomy, and ending anti-Semitism and racism inside and outside of medicine. Simon Amaya Price is a desister, writer, and speaker who is dedicated to winning the fight against gender ideology in a way that aligns with classical liberal values. At age 14, Simon came out as transgender but later desisted. In October of 2024, as part of a class he was taking, Simon planned to host an event titled Born in the Right Body, Desister and Detransitioner Awareness at Berklee College of Music, where he recently graduated cum laude at age 20. However, after facing threats, harassment, and bullying from classmates and administrators, his event was canceled by Berklee's vice president. Undeterred, Simon went on to host the event at MIT last November to an audience of over 100. Since then, Simon has written articles for the Boston Globe and local advocacy groups testifying in favor of bills in West Virginia, New Hampshire, and Connecticut, appearing on podcasts, given talks to communities across New England, and he's been featured in news articles by the Daily Mail, the Boston Herald, the Daily Signal, among others. Simon is currently applying to be an officer in the U.S. Space Force, and he looks forward to a career in politics. Erin Lee is the mother of 3 children from northern Colorado. She is a speaker and writer, as well as the founder of Stop Gender Ideology and the executive director of Protect Kids Colorado. She has told the story of rescuing her 12-year-old daughter from transgender grooming in public schools on multiple outlets, including Fox News, Glenn Beck, Newsmax, The Daily Wire, The Epoch Times, and The Daily Mail UK. Last year, she released the film Art Club, documenting her family's story. It is available at artclubmovie.com. Erin travels the country to awaken parents to what's happening in government schools and to encourage them to fight back against gender ideology. Representative Steve Toth is a dedicated public servant and Texas state representative, serving the people of Montgomery County. Known for his strong conservative values, he is committed to protecting individual freedoms, promoting fiscal responsibility, and advocating for family values. Toth has been a vocal supporter of limited government and has worked tirelessly on such issues as education reform, border security, and the protection of constitutional rights. As a small business owner and former pastor, Toth brings a unique perspective to the Texas legislature grounded in faith, community service, and a passion for making a difference. Dr. Ross, would you please provide us with some background on gender transitioning and detransitioning?
Yep. Thanks so much, Chris. I think it's important to understand this gender confusion or gender dysphoria in children has become much more common. Based on the research we see, up to 1 to 2% of children in the US are suffering from this. And that's over 100 times higher than was reported in 2013 when the DSM-5 or Diagnostic and Statistics Manual version 5 was published, as you mentioned. Additionally, a recent study in JAMA Pediatrics showed that 1 in 1,000 minors in the US is on cross-sex hormones. So this is very concerning to us. We know that most children with gender distress have underlying health and mental health challenges, whether that be depression, anxiety, eating disorders, autism spectrum disorder, or unfortunately, a history of physical or sexual abuse. And we also know that none of the treatments proposed by these radical ideologues who purport to care for these children, none of those supposed treatments actually address these underlying issues. In fact, they're sold as this so-called gender-affirming care, as a silver bullet, a cure-all for whatever ails them. But these treatments have significant risks associated with them, aside from the fact that they don't address the underlying issue. So-called gender-affirming care is often sold as a 4-step process, with social transition, changing names, pronouns, and wardrobe, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and then finally moving on to these mutilative surgeries. Social transition is often overlooked, but children, very young children, 10 or 11 or even younger, are very susceptible to influence, to the positive reinforcement they receive for the bravery of coming out as so-called born in the wrong body. This positive reinforcement, unfortunately, comes from schools and teachers, from social media, and from traditional media, such as TV and movies. And in our society, we don't allow children to make life-changing decisions. We know that the frontal lobe of the brain is still developing, up to age 25. And children are very vulnerable to this positive reinforcement, especially children who are suffering. Children then move on to puberty blockers if they are young enough and have not completed puberty. These medications are not FDA approved for this purpose, and they're often sold as being reversible. But as we now know, they are nothing but reversible. They cause a permanent decrease in bone density, retard growth, and recent studies have showed impaired brain development in the areas of learning, memory, and emotional processing. Additionally, we know that 97 to 100% of children who start on puberty blockers will continue on to take cross-sex hormones. This directly counters the benign idea that this is simply buying time for children to figure themselves out. The next step is cross-sex hormones. As I mentioned, 1 in 1,000 American children are now on these dangerous medications. They permanently alter the body in both structure and function. They permanently impair fertility, as a recent study published in January out of Belgium and the Netherlands just showed. And they have significant risks, including heart attack, stroke, blood clots, and various types of cancers. The final step on this journey is surgical procedures. These are irreversible and experimental, and involve cutting off and mutilating healthy body parts. Our data in the Stop the Harm database shows that nearly 5,800 minors underwent these procedures over a 5-year period, disputing the claim that these procedures are rare or not occurring on children. On Detransitioner Awareness Day, we think of detransitioners, sometimes called desisters, for a concern that detransitioning legitimizes the idea that a child can transition to the opposite sex. But I'll let Simon address that issue. Desisting or detransitioning is attempting to restore these changes. Unfortunately, most of them cannot be reversed, whether that's facial hair, a deeper voice, removed breasts, or even removed testicles. These children are trying to come back from this dark path, which can be especially challenging as they're often abandoned by the very doctors who started them down this pathway.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Ross, and Simon. We're really happy to have you here to share with us your experience with this. Whatever you're comfortable sharing, I understand if there's just based on the subject material. If you're not comfortable sharing something, don't feel obligated. But your perspective on this is highly valued, and that's of course what Detransition Awareness Day is about. So please, I'd love to hear more from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everybody, thanks for having me. As was mentioned, my name's Amaya Price. I'm a desister. So I guess I'll give you a little story about me and my thoughts on this issue. So today I'm sitting in front of you as a 20-year-old man, but for 3 years, starting from when I was 14, I thought I was a girl. As you mentioned, I received my bachelor's degree in music from Berklee College of Music last December and additional coursework at Harvard University in mathematics. I still remember being 14. I was sitting in my pediatrician's office explaining to him that I was transgender and that my father wasn't affirming my new identity. So naturally, my pediatrician asked my father, "Would you like a dead son or a living daughter?" I was in the room when he asked this question. There's no other situation when a doctor is allowed to suggest suicide like this to a patient, nonetheless a child. And quite frankly, that's medical malpractice. We all know that this is a common argument used by activists. We've all heard it. But what a lot of people don't realize is that if you ask parents of trans-identified kids and other desisters and detransitioners, the same reasoning, the same line, in fact, is commonly used by doctors in medical settings. So, despite being referred to my local gender clinic 3 times by 3 separate doctors, the emotional blackmail in my gender dysphoria diagnosis, my father refused to take me to be medicalized, and I hated him for it at the time. But today, I am beyond grateful that he had educated himself enough to see the subject, educated himself enough about the subject to see through the ideology. And we're all here because it's not just me. 3% of 18 to 24-year-olds in this country identify as transgender. As Jared mentioned before me, according to a recent study, 1 in 1,000 17-year-olds in 2023 were on cross-sex hormones. So between the time I started high school and the time my class graduated, the prevalence of transgender identification in my generation more than doubled. 1/6 of the boys in my class eventually ended up identifying as trans, many of whom medicalized. My girlfriend is a detransitioner, and I can't do much more than pray that if and when we decide to have kids, that despite the double mastectomy, which precludes her from ever breastfeeding, and the 4 years of cross-sex hormones she was given starting from when she was a minor, that she is able to carry a pregnancy to term. The other side of this issue, these activists, they believe that if you don't give trans-identified kids puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, surgeries, social affirmation, all of these different things, that they will kill themselves. That's a damned lie, and I'm living proof of that fact. I was not put on hormones. I was not operated on. My father did not affirm me, and I've grown up to be a healthy and happy 20-year-old man. In fact, not only do these procedures not prevent suicide, but according to the biggest study of its kind to date, published on February 25th in the Journal of Sexual Medicine by Joshua Lewis et al., depression and anxiety rates following gender-affirming surgeries more than double. I've also talked to parents with detransitioner children who took their own lives after realizing they regretted what they had done to their bodies. Whenever we're talking to these activists and they bring up this suicide myth, look them in their eyes and ask them, well, what are you going to say to the parents of detransitioners who killed themselves? That takes away all their ammunition. These people, they have both psychological and economic incentives to not give up this fight. Imagine being a doctor who prescribed cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers or gave children sex change surgeries. What would you do if you were presented with the evidence that what you were doing was not helping, but in fact permanently harming your patients? I would know I have a very hard time accepting that. Transgender healthcare is a multi-billion-dollar industry in this country. Though estimates vary, the lifetime cost of providing a trans-identified individual with hormones and surgeries exceeds $100,000 on average. And that might be a very conservative estimate. Some people say it's $500,000. What would you do if you were a hospital administrator or a doctor who made $1 million for your clinic for every 10 of these patients you treated? And I could talk all day about the things that people on the other side of this issue get wrong. But I would like to remind all of you and everybody watching that trans-identified kids and young adults deserve empathy. They're not trans because everything is going right in their lives, but because they are deeply distressed. We are here because we want to help young people, not villainize them. We need to give people off-ramps and ways to save face on this issue. As Sun Tzu said in The Art of War, when you surround an army, leave an outlet free. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. While I don't have a complete answer on how to apply this to our present situation, I do have a start. Support detransitioners and desisters, and be willing to talk respectfully to everyone who is willing to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. So Erin, social transition in K-12 schools has been described as the school-to-clinic pipeline. Can you tell us about the secret gender transition club your daughter's school recruited her to join?
Yeah, so my 12-year-old daughter was recruited into a secret gender and sexuality club at her school in 6th grade, disguised as an art club, where activists were brought in, where they convinced my little girl that her normal pubescent discomfort means she's actually a transgender boy. We had just moved across the country, then COVID hit. My daughter's a shy, quirky kid, and she was truly taken advantage of by these predators who positioned themselves as trusted adults in her life. They talked about sexual attraction, taught her concepts like polyamory, puberty blockers, top surgery, how to see an affirming counselor without telling us, which is legal in Colorado where I live. They actually lowered the age of healthcare consent to 12 here in 2019. And they taught her how to get a gender affirming care letter at school. They connected her with online predators on Discord and WhatsApp and the Trevor Project, and repeatedly told her parents aren't safe and to keep these meetings a secret. Now, we're one of the lucky families who caught all of this very quickly, but after years of subtle indoctrination in the public schools about gender ideology, and now these secret sexuality and gender meetings, our girl fell deeply into this darkness of trans identity. And it took us about a year to get her out of the cult. We were threatened with Child Protective Services when we found out and removed her from the school. We were bullied by everyone with the suicide myth. Do we want a dead daughter or a living son? And we must go along with it or she'll kill herself. We learned the hard way that here in Colorado, licensed therapists are legally required to only affirm gender-confused kids. So when we took her to therapy, it actually made our daughter worse and spiraled her into suicidal ideation. When we received a suicide note from our little girl, just 12 years old, just a few weeks before Christmas, We rushed her to our trusted pediatrician, who also bullied us with the suicide myth and had us leave the room for her mental health assessment. Again, that's her right here in the state of Colorado, per House Bill 1120 that was passed in 2019. And when we came back into the room, our 12-year-old had already been prescribed Zoloft, a psychotropic drug that ultimately made her physically sick and only slapped a Band-Aid on this mental health distress over her sex, which exacerbated her suicidal ideation and confusion and depression. It wasn't until nearly a year into the nightmare that we were able to wake our daughter up and save her from the gender cult. My husband's honesty and unwillingness to bend an inch to her rapid onset gender dysphoria was a big factor. She's now completely desisted and understands what has happened to her. She actually just turned 16 last weekend, and she will be doing her first public event alongside Dr. Miriam Grossman and Leor Sapir and January Littlejohn on April 6th here in Colorado. She's an overcomer and just an amazing kid. We're one of the very few lucky ones to have this happy ending to our horror story. So all that said, yes, there is a classroom to clinic pipeline. My child was placed on this conveyor belt, and I wasn't supposed to find out about it, but I did find out, and I was able to get her off the belt before it went too far. I just want to highlight a few things. First of all, the harms of social transition, as Dr. Ross and Simon pointed to. We're lucky our girl's a desister, not a detransitioner, because we saved her before she mutilated herself. But the long-term damage and the mental and emotional scars of what she and every desister have gone through don't just go away. And the hits that our family have taken just to save our girl and to tell the truth don't just go away. Social transition is a psychosocial medical intervention, and doing it outside the purview of parents only increases the harm that's caused to our kids. And then there's just a few layers here in my school district that I want to highlight for parents. I think a lot of people don't understand. They're especially prevalent in blue states, but I caution parents that they're happening in all 50 states. Education as a whole has been captured by gender ideology via the teachers' unions, billionaire-funded NGOs, and the broken higher ed system that's been captured for decades. We're not going to fix it overnight. But here in my school district, we have what's called school-based health centers, part of the whole child, whole community model that's being facilitated across the country. I think Maine, there was just a huge news story that came out from Courage is a Habit about these happening in Maine. These are private clinics within our most underserved middle and high schools with a blanket consent policy. So if a parent consents to an ibuprofen in second grade, they have just blanket consented to healthcare for the duration of their child's time in the K through 12 district. Also, we have confidential gender support plans, and we actually passed a new state law last year forcing the compelled speech of teachers to socially transition kids and not tell parents that they've done it. And so bottom line, I just strongly encourage all parents who can to take their kids out of public schools. That's always my baseline message. But watch out for these sneaky policies and laws. And also, I want to empower parents to take their authority back over their children's education and healthcare. That is an inalienable, God-given right that's being attacked left and right, and we have to fight to keep it. My school district impeded my right to know what's happening with the health and well-being of my own child, but our family and another family are actually blessed to be represented by AFPI, and our federal case now sits at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals awaiting a decision. And no matter what happens, we will not stop fighting to protect our rights and our kids.
Thank you, Erin. That's amazing to hear. And thank you for sharing that. So I'd like to turn now to potential state policy remedies. As everyone here is aware, President Trump has transformed the federal landscape on this issue, but the states play a very prominent role in our system of government. The battle to protect children from sex reassignment surgeries and hormones will continue to be waged in the states. In our system, the states serve the crucial function of laboratories of democracy, or testing grounds for future national policy reforms. Currently, 27 states have enacted laws to restrict sex reassignment surgeries and hormone therapies for children. 23 states and DC have failed to do the same. And indeed, 15 of these currently codify access to these procedures for children in law. So I'll take this time to note that AFPI has a new report on this very subject. It's titled State Reforms to Protect Children from Harmful and Irreversible Transgender Medical Procedures. We're very fortunate to have Texas Representative Steve Toth with us today. Representative Toth recently introduced the Vulnerable Youth Protection Act for consideration by the Texas State Legislature. And this gets to the social transition issue that keeps coming up and that actually hasn't gotten enough attention until now. And so I would love to invite Representative Toth to brief us a little bit on what this important bill does and its progress and all things vulnerable youth protection.
Hey, great to be with you, Chris. I just want to affirm Erin, what she said earlier. This is in all the schools. Texas is the reddest state in the union. Montgomery County, where I represent, is the reddest county in all of Texas. The reddest, deepest red conservative area in all of the United States. And yet in 2021, we found out from a teacher that the teachers were encouraging students that used a different name other than their biological sex, that they were not to tell the parents that this is going on. When we found out about it, I asked the superintendent about it, and he said, Steve, you just don't understand. You don't understand. This is the new rewrite of Title IX. And I said, there is no rewrite of Title IX. To which he then said, yeah, there is. You're not an attorney, you don't understand. And I said, Dr. Null, I said, there are those that write the law, those that argue the law, and those that decide the law. And I do understand it very well. There's no stare decisis. There's no court precedents. There's not even a case before the courts, nor is there an executive order from either Trump or Biden that has rewritten this. And yet he insisted that this is, and I'm telling you, these guys just believe it. And then he actually said, Steve, what you're doing, you just don't understand. These kids are suicidal. And if we don't do this, they're going to be more suicidal. To which I said, Dr. Null, you're making these kids more suicidal. You are making them more suicidal because you can't nurture a kid. You can't love a kid. You're not there to wipe the tears from this child. You're not there when they're an emotional wreck or mess because of the trauma that they've endured. Maybe, or maybe it's because of autism, or maybe it's because of depression. You're not there to understand or help them through any of it. And so what you're actually doing is you're alienating these children from their parents by saying mom and dad can't be trusted. And that's what our bill goes after. All the bills that you hear, all the bills that you see across the United States, politicians, Republicans are going to pat themselves on the back that they passed something only to see 3 months, 4 months later, it's going to be overturned at a federal court or at the Supreme Court level because it attacks speech. And so what we're doing, which is uniquely different than any bill in the United States, and I'm really excited to see that the state of Arkansas has picked it up and is moving it right now. There's a hearing this week. What we do is we go after the alienating behavior with civil penalties. And because they're civil penalties, Chris, they can't be enjoined at the local, state, or federal level. And so maybe many of you are familiar with a heartbeat bill that Texas passed. I co-authored it a couple sessions ago. And Jonathan Mitchell actually wrote it, and the guy he's the most brilliant jurist in the world. He replaced Cruz as our Solicitor General in the state of Texas. And the crazy thing is that when the heartbeat bill went into effect, it was a $10,000 lawsuit. Anybody in the state of Texas could sue any abortionist in the state for $10,000. And day one, when it became law in Texas, Planned Parenthood desisted 100% of their surgical abortions. It was amazing. And they never even challenged it in the courts. And so Jonathan Mitchell has used his same brilliance in our bill as well, House Bill 2258 in Texas. We're excited, and it's really cool to see other states that are instituting it as well right now. But what's also cool about the bill is that, Simon, up to 20-year statute of limitations, you can come back and bring a lawsuit. So if you were to find, you know Prisha, you probably know Prisha, and Prisha is one of the first kids that just, my wife and I saw her video and we cried with her as she wept over the fact that I may not be able to have a baby someday. By God's grace, Prisha has a beautiful little baby today, but if Prisha were not able to have a baby, under this bill, it's a 20-year statute of limitations where you can come back and the starting damages, punitive damages against the doctor or the counselor starts at $10 million. And it will bankrupt Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood has moved on from abortions to this. This is the cash cow that Planned Parenthood has always looked for, and we're going to destroy them with it.
That's fantastic. That's so great to hear. And Dr. Ross, I know that Do No Harm also has a new piece of model legislation, and it covers it from a different angle, covers some of these same topics. Could you tell us a little bit about the transgender Bill of Rights? Sorry, Detransitioner Bill of Rights.
Thanks so much, Chris. Yes, Do No Harm has authored a Detransitioner Bill of Rights, and as you mentioned, it's a model legislation covering 5 core rights for desisters or detransitioners, and that includes informed consent, effective care, insurance coverage, legal restoration, and justice, legal justice. So for informed consent, it requires that children and parents are made well aware of the very strong, both domestic and international scientific and medical data that shows that these so-called treatments do not help and actually cause severe harm to these children. The second is effective care, protecting access to reality-affirming mental health care. As Erin mentioned, making sure that mental health care professionals are not legally shackled to affirming the delusions of children, so that they can receive mental health care to help address the issues underlying their gender distress. The third is insurance coverage, requiring that insurance that cover these mutilative and irreversible surgeries also cover medications and procedures that attempt to undo some of that damage. Fourth is legal restoration, the ability to change their name back, change sex markers and legal documentation back to their birth sex. And last is justice, the right to bring legal action and meaningfully extending that statute of limitations, to keep in mind that we're dealing with children here, and it may take a few years after they hit adulthood for them to realize how misled they've been. In addition to the 5 core rights for detransitioners themselves, there's a right to public transparency regarding these procedures, who's doing them, where they're being done, how often they're being done, and who's paying for them, so that we as taxpayers and citizens and policymakers as well have full transparency into this industry.
That's great to hear. Yeah, so I would love to hear more about that. I think it's a good time to open up the floor, kind of allow, let everybody ask each other questions. I know, Erin, you had something to maybe start us off. There's you had some ideas about what a blue state strategy might be, and I know I've talked with some friends about getting the issue on the ballot. I think perhaps starting on the medical side, although as important as the social affirmation is absolutely vital, but I think probably the low-hanging fruit, and even in a place like California, might be putting the issues that have motivated legislatures in 27 largely red states ahead of the voters. It'd be wonderful if we could then extend that to the social transition side as well. But Erin, I'll give the floor to you, and then please don't wait for me if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what Representative Toth said, and we've got to show up and support these good bills that are happening in states where they can pass. We're running them here too, like in Colorado, we ran your same bill, the Detransitioner Bill of Rights. We ran the statute of limitations extension, a ban on youth mutilation. These can't pass in a state like Colorado where we have a radical supermajority. So I actually co-founded an organization called Protect Kids Colorado, and we run citizens ballot initiatives. This is a process that's available in 26 states. Aaron Friday's doing the same thing with Protect Kids California. But polling has showed, even New York Times polling recently showed that 80% of Americans don't agree with this. This isn't a popular issue. So if we, the people, can put it before the people, there will be an overwhelming vote to stop these practices. And so I'm proud to say that my organization is running a ban on gender mutilation for minors that will get on the 2026 ballot. And so we will ban it in these radical blue states by the will of the people. And I encourage other states to follow suit.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. So maybe Representative Toth, can you tell us where the Vulnerable Youth Protection Act is kind of in the process? Tell us what you can about its prospects. Obviously, Texas is usually a friendly state.
Well, this is going to be a challenge because we are a very red state. Unfortunately, we've given in the Texas House, we've given Democrats too big of a seat at the table. And these are the most radical members that you can possibly imagine. If you think DC has a squad, we have a squad here too. And they're radically in the tank for the gender ideology cult to the nth degree. And they'll be happy to allow one of the other 3 or 4 bills that are there that are going through the House right now that criminalize this activity, knowing full well that it's an assault on the First Amendment and the courts are going to throw it out. But they do not want this bill. So it's going to be a fight, a real hard fight for us to get this bill passed. And, we're thankful for AFPI, and we're thankful that it's getting a lot of great attention from a lot of high-profile people across the United States, and that other states are adopting it before Texas, which makes me crazy. So
I have a question for Simon. It's Detransitioner Day of Awareness, and detransitioners don't get enough attention. They don't get any publicity, news coverage, but they're growing every day. There's over 50,000 detransitioners now in the Reddit group. So what can we be doing? What can everyone be doing to help support them, elevate their voice, get behind them? I know it's hard to speak out about it. So what can we be doing to support detransitioners?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am tempted to simply say, give us money. But I think really we need better organizations which are specifically for supporting detransitioners and desisters. This Wednesday, actually, I'm going to a reception for the Resilience Network, which is an organization run by medical doctors and other folks to help support desisters and detransitioners with medical issues pertaining to their desistance or detransition. And I think things like that are very important. Right now, I know there are 2 groups of people who are trying to start specifically desister or detransitioner nonprofits, which will have some degree of media support and things of that sort. So keep that on your radar. Of course, I'll be talking about it. And of course, whenever you see us in the news or when you see we have an event, tell people. Send them the article, show up to the event, anything that you can do. There's lots of detransitioners and desisters on Twitter, and engaging with their stuff and giving them a follow, is one of the great things you can do. So it's a hard question, but yeah. And there are always opportunities to get involved with organizing and stuff.
Yeah. Have you, so you're active in New England, right?
Yeah.
Have you had, what's the reception been by either if you've encountered maybe Democrat representatives or just maybe liberals out? I mean, what's the argument? Is the argument you don't exist, you're not standing in front of me? You know, because at a certain point, it's kind of, you can imagine the person who's unwilling, they're so invested in the programming that anyone who's spent any time in college has had, where they may come to a position where they say like, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, I want to support both sides, but if just the mere existence of desisters and detransitioners has to be kind of shaking to that worldview, doesn't it? Or I'm just curious what you've seen.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think that's why a lot of the folks on the other side of this issue have made it so clear to me that they don't want me or people like me to exist. I receive death threats pretty regularly. Wow. Somebody attempted to dox me last Saturday. And not last Saturday, but Saturday before last Saturday, rather. I got a lovely email, and it had my dead grandmother's address on it. Wow. And luckily, I had scrubbed my address from the internet. Thank you, Incogni, not sponsored. But that's one of the things I get pretty regularly, and a lot of other desisters and detransitioners get. Once you get in person with these people, really, people like me, we rob them of one of their central talking points, which is the suicide myth. Some of them double down on it. They're saying, you advocating what you're advocating for, you're killing kids. Some say that, oh, you weren't ever actually trans. And then, you know, I was like asking them a question, okay, how do you tell the difference between somebody who's actually trans and somebody who's just saying they're trans? And I commented this on a Brianna Wu post recently, and he has since blocked me. So I know that's a big thorn in their side there. In New Hampshire, I was testifying there last week for a ban bill for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and then another one for mastectomies and breast-related surgeries for minors. And the first question I got was, are you being paid to testify? And I was the only person who was asked this question in over 10 hours of testimony about, and there were lawyers from the ACLU and GLAAD, all of these different organizations who were there being paid. And they're just trying to rely on these dirty tricks, these what essentially boil down to memes. If you say something enough times, people start believing it, and they just repeat the things that they've heard so many times, and that's the best they've got, really.
I'll just add for people who want to support detransitioners, there's a great firm actually out of Texas, Campbell Miller Payne, and they are dads with a bunch of kids in between them that all gave up their legal careers to just handle detransitioners' medical lawsuits. I know they represent Prisha, and they're doing it all out of their own pocket. And so if you want to support detransitioners in their legal pursuit against the doctors who butchered them, Campbell Miller Payne is a great one to connect with.
That's fantastic. I got to say, as a dad, it warms my heart to hear from Erin and Simon both. It was the dads who just said no, like just flat out no. I don't care what the fashionable thing is today. I'm going to rely on common sense. So, well, look, I want to thank everyone for joining today. I want to say thank you to our audience as well for tuning in. To learn more about these issues, please visit AmericaFirstPolicy.com and check out the Higher Education Reform Initiative page to view our new report. Please also visit DoNoHarmMedicine.org, where you can learn more about the Detransitioner Bill of Rights. Visit grassrootstherapists.com, that's therapists with an S, to learn more about Texas Vulnerable Youth Protection Act. And visit artclubmovie.com to watch a free documentary exposing gender ideology grooming in Colorado schools. Thank you all again for being here.